Well, at the end of the adventure, I was the only one that still had shoes on, and what was supposed to take 3 hours ended up being 10 and a half hours and 17.6 miles of rowing. They say never waste a good crisis, so let's talk about it. So a lot of you that keep up with the channel know that I recently just had surgery and I was released on good behavior, and I was allowed to go on adventure trips again, and my wife got really excited and she planned out a trip. And God bless her heart, she did an awesome job. She already has a kayak, and she went out and went on Craigslist and found a Field and Stream kayak for $60 and got a paddle and the vest and did all the research for the trip and everything. And I mean, for, you know, under $100, I mean, we had a pretty good trip in mind. And I know all of you are like, well, why don't you have a kayak? Like, I've actually been on the water a good bit. I just haven't found the one I want, and I have Gucci taste sometimes. I think it's all that white girl coffee I've had lately. Well, she knew that I had bills due, and she wasn't about to put that on me, and she's like that. She's just a really giving person, and she wanted to go down the river, and so, you know, she made it happen. Now, this is a story how little bitty things can add up into a big catastrophe, because, I mean, it's the truth. Emergency waits for no man. And the number one thing that I heard in search and rescue was I never thought it would happen to me. Now, having been in search and rescue, being a rope tech, being Swiftwater certified, you know, being an EMT, being a SAR-1, I've been privy to a lot of, you know, let's just say potential disasters. And I am not a fear-mongering kind of guy whatsoever. You know, I think you should, you know, plan for the worst, hope for the best, but that doesn't mean that, you know, you should be afraid to walk outside your door. I honestly think it's good to scare yourself every now and again. I think the thing that I really want to communicate, though, is you need to take calculated risks. So normally I'm the gear guy, and normally, you know, I do all the planning for adventure trips. But in this case, my wife, you know, did all of that, and I was just along for the ride, and I was supposed to be in the moment. And at the beginning of the trip, I said, what could go wrong? Let's just go on 3. Well, sometimes things go wrong. I think for this story, I'm gonna change the names to protect the innocent and the guilty. Now, just so y'all know, I did not know who we were with. The only person that I knew was my wife. Now, it wasn't like we were just going with total strangers. The girl knew my wife from work, and then she had a guy with her. So when my wife did the research for the trip, she had gone online, and the website said that, you know, it's about a 3-hour trip, and you'll go about 8 miles. Well, I can assure you, there's absolutely no way that you could go 3 hours or 8 miles, because where we put in and where we put out, there were no put outs in between. The first mistake that was made, I'll say, was at the put in, because the guy who was running the put in, he was taking cash from people, and he offered, you know, hey, I'll hold on to your keys and your wallet for you while you go down the river. You can come get them from me at the end when you get back. There was no way that I was going to leave my keys and my wallet there, and I didn't. But guess who did? Now that will come into play later in the story. A lot of people are going to say, why don't you have, you know, video footage from, you know, this little adventure? Well, tip number 2, you should always put your phone on battery save. I always, you know, do the airplane mode, turn off the Wi-Fi, all Bluetooth, all the things. And at the end of the trip, I had 60% of my battery left, but guess what? Everybody else was down to like 2, 3, 1%. One of the main reasons for that is we were up in Northeast Georgia, and there was no reception whatsoever, and the phones were just constantly searching. And I just felt like, you know, hey, you need to be the one that does this. Don't pull out your phone. Just be in the moment. Enjoy the time with your wife and these new people that you've met. So one of the attractions up there, we were in Dahlonega, and there was a lot of gold mining that happened there, and there's a tunnel that goes through a mountain up there. Now, I had actually planned on doing a video, like an updated video on my gear for 2025. What I took with me was I took my Terra Humara pack, I took a first aid kit, I had my GPS, and I had this dry sack. It's a military dry sack, and on the inside of it, it has a marker panel in case you need to use it. And well, it could have happened on this trip, actually. People don't really think about it, but we had a situation where my wife saw a baby copperhead. They had lost their shoes in the rapids, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go, but they didn't have any shoes, and we had found an old decommissioned mill that was out there, and there were these huge gears, I mean just massively huge gears that were supporting up this dilapidated structure. And you know, they were all busy just looking at that, taking pictures, and my wife looked down and there was a copperhead right at her feet. Now I still have the scar. I got bit by a baby copperhead when I was in college, and I can promise you that is a very bad day. What's important about this, she didn't get bit, okay? We'll just start with that. She didn't get bit. She recognized it and was able to, you know, use her paddle, and she got away and everything was fine. But the place that we were at, we still had a bunch of miles to go. There were no egress routes from there. We weren't around any homes. We had absolutely no service. I mean, I probably would have had to have marched out of there, found service, you know, used my GPS, you know, with the coordinates. I would have had to have set a waypoint, and I would have had to have set up an LZ for a helicopter to come in. And I've done that many times in search and rescue on that very river. And I promise you that is a very expensive ride. Now imagine if I didn't have my GPS and I didn't have the coordinates and I didn't know where we were, and I was God knows where trying to make the phone call and trying to communicate to somebody, you know, where I was. Another thing that people don't think about is the systems that we use on the GPS. Like I use US National Grid, but maybe the helicopter pilot is going to want to have, you know, degrees, minutes, or seconds. So a lot of times you have to do the conversion on the ground for the pilots. And thankfully I'm trained to do that. It's pretty simple. You just go into your GPS and you change everything in the settings. But a lot of people aren't aware of that, and they've never done it before. Now, one thing after the fact, I mean, that I wish that I had was a map. I love having maps. Having been in SAR, yeah, a map is something that I really wished I'd had. But thankfully I had the GPS and everything was okay. But you know, this just reinforced why I always carry a map with me. Now, another thing that was frustrating to the people on the trip was, you know, they couldn't pull up any maps to see where they were and how much further we had to go. Because I had a GPS, you know, I was able to do that. And there's a lot to be said about, you know, keeping people calm when they can't do the things they want to do, because things will escalate as, you know, time goes on. So one thing that I am super grateful for is that I am not allergic to poison ivy. Unfortunately, our guests were, and there were a lot of trees that were down because of tornadoes. And unfortunately, they didn't just get tore up from the branches and all that trying to get through all the trees. Unfortunately, they got poison ivy as well. And on top of that, the kayaks that they were in had fiberglass in them, and so I felt really bad for them because they were sunburned, had fiberglass, and also they had the poison ivy as well. Now for me, that's the trifecta. That right there just sucks. Not to mention the bugs, because there were bugs everywhere. Now, one thing that I do when I go on trips like that is I always have on my fishing shirts. I know y'all have seen me wear them all the time. They're long sleeve and they have a hood. My poor wife, her back looked like, you know, as red as this medical kit. Thankfully, our kayaks were not made with fiberglass, so good job, honey. And thankfully, neither one of us are allergic to poison ivy. But it goes to say, you know, you should have some kind of medical kit on you, especially if you're allergic to things like that, or maybe even bee stings. Because one of the dangers of being in the water are wasp nests that can be in the trees. And because there were so many trees that were down, that was a real danger. I also carry bug dope in my kit, and I make sure that I treat my clothes with permethrin as well. Now, there was one point in the trip where I had stopped and I was on the GPS and I was just plotting stuff out, and a whole pack of coyotes came running down. I was shocked how aggressive they were, because having been a nuisance hunter, I've really never seen, you know, coyotes be that aggressive with people. Now, they didn't do anything once they got to the shore. They were just looking at me, but ironically, we were up in bear country. So I was thankful that I had a firearm on me at the time. For those who are wondering, I shoot a 10mm and I carry 220 grain hard cast Underwood. Now, thankfully I didn't have to use it, but what if I did? and I have had to use it before. Another thing that happened was the guy that was with us, he ended up breaking his paddle. You can imagine how irritating that would be. After 3 hours had passed and I was looking at the GPS, I realized, oh my God, we have a really long way to go. So y'all need to man up, because it's going to be a really long day. Because it was the typical drill, right? You row a little bit, you want to stretch your back, so you get out, maybe you eat a snack, you snap some pictures, you find rocks or whatever else you can take home. But early on, I knew that we had a really long way to go, and so I tried to keep those, as short as possible. Something else that was really irritating to me, and it's of no fault to my wife whatsoever, but the kayak that I was in, it had 4 attachment points for the seat. And unfortunately, the hardware kept letting go violently, and I would go flying back in my seat, paddles coming out of the water and upsetting the balance of the kayak. Now, at one point, that was actually pretty serious, because we went over some rapids and there was a 12 by 12 beam of rough cut lumber that had, nails and bolts and stuff in it. And I hit that and endoed the kayak. Now, in a situation like that, there's nothing you can do. You're just along for the ride. But it was in a rapid, and thankfully I had everything on a lanyard, and it was attached with bungees to the actual kayak. And thankfully I didn't lose anything except for my hat. Now, I wasn't wearing my lucky hat. Maybe I should have been wearing the lucky hat, but hey, just be aware that you're gonna lose stuff. And a little trick I learned in SAR is anything that's really important to you, make sure that it has a lanyard. Because unfortunately, the people that I was with didn't have lanyards on everything, and they lost things like their shoes. And some of the places that we were at, I mean, these are all country people that are used to being on water. Some of the rocks were so sharp that even they couldn't walk around. If I didn't have my shoes, I have baby feet, y'all. Like, I'm telling you, I just would have curled up and, hoped that somebody came to get me. Now, I like having closed-toed shoes. A lot of people like wearing sandals, and that's totally cool. But in the rapids that we're in, there were just a lot of rocks, and I just absolutely hate stubbing my toe. That can be an issue. And on top of that, I wear socks. I actually wear wool socks to go with my river shoes. They're actually zeros. And the reason for that is because of all the little rocks and sand and debris and stuff that gets inside of your shoes. It just helps to cushion against that. On a normal trip, it probably, wouldn't matter. That, something bad may not actually happen to you. It didn't happen to me, but it happened to other people we were with. Now, I think it goes without saying, like, you need to have food and you need to have water, because you need the calories. You also need electrolytes, especially if you're having to work that hard. But something, you don't think about is what happens when you lose the food, right? You topple over and the food goes into the drink. Thankfully, once again, all of my stuff was attached and I didn't have to worry about that. Now, something else that really needs to be talked about is when all of these little bitty things start to add up, and low blood sugar, you're thirsty, your muscles are getting to the point of fatigue, it isn't fun anymore. You're bruised up, you're itching, you're getting bit by horseflies, you've lost your stuff, things weren't going the way that you thought they were gonna go. Well, people handle grief differently. And I have a lot of experience with de-escalation. There's been several times where I was actually on the news where people were screaming at me, they were cussing at me, spitting at me. I didn't spend my tax dollars so that you could come and help me. And they were definitely at the point of needing help. Now, it goes without saying, later, you get an apology, but people, when they let go and they're stressed out, they say things they don't mean. And so de-escalation is definitely a skill that I tell people that, hey, this is pretty important to have. There was one moment where the girl that was with us, she had pulled off to the side and she was getting out of there no matter what. Like, she was just gonna walk away and she was gonna find service, and her phone was down to like 3%. And that took a little bit of time to calm her down. And sometimes you have to be the diplomat through somebody else that can get to them. And that's what I had to do. I had to get with the guy. I had to say, hey man, look, this is our situation. This is where we are. We're 3 miles from the put out in a straight line, but for the time for us to go through all these switchbacks and everything else, hey, it's probably going to be about 6 miles. Now we have to get her back into the kayak because, well, it's getting dark. And that's another thing. I had a light for me and I had a light for my wife, and I had, backup as well. You never know when you're going to be in a situation where you need a light. What I knew at the time though was that we needed to go, like right then. Now unfortunately the river, it was down a good bit, and so a large part of what we had to do was walking or portaging, whatever you want to call it. We had to, tow the kayaks with us. After looking back on the GPS, I realized that we had to walk 3.2 miles, and the rest of the time, we were actually paddling. Now, 3.2 miles, that's a lot of walking on a river. And because of the recent tornadoes and all the trees down, that was a big pain in the ass too. And I told my wife even afterwards, I learned stuff every trip we go on. I should have brought my silky saw. That would have helped out a ton on the trip. And I even mentioned it to her, I just forgot to bring it. It was actually in the Jeep. I had it staged, I just forgot to put it into the pack. Another thing, having looked back, like I wished I'd had one of the Garmin inReaches. My only problem with the inReach is you have to pay a monthly service, and that's something I hate. Maybe an alternative would be the Teen Mobile satellite thing, or doing the Elon Musk route. But like I said, what if, there was some kind of allergic reaction? What if there was somebody broke an ankle or, got injured seriously, busted a head open or something? The ability to send a message via a satellite would have been awesome to have. Now, thankfully, none of that happened. I'm just telling you that I'm aware that these things do happen, and I've been there to be the one to rescue them. A very real possibility during this trip would have been we might have had to have camped out. I had everything that I needed in my pack to camp out. My wife, she grew up on the exact river that we were on. We would have been totally fine. But I imagine the people that we were with, they probably weren't prepared for that. Now I have the skill, the bushcraft skills to make all of that stuff happen, but you can imagine just how tired you would be after, 17.6 miles, like how hard it would be to make those things happen. So the moral of the story is, be prepared for the unexpected. And there's a lot to be said about convenience, like just having an ultralight hammock, some kind of tarp to go over you. Here in Georgia, we don't really worry about fresh clothes because, you're gonna be wet. It's humid as all get out right now. We welcome the rain because it just feels so much better because you're giving off that much more heat. And if you're not wet from sweat or rain, then you're wet from being in the water. And obviously, I wear clothes that dry out lickety split. Another thing that's really important is I had my Grail on me, and thank God, right? Because now, you have a source of water, but you're basically swimming in a toilet bowl. And the ability to, filter and purify and carry your water, golly, that is worth its weight in gold. Now, the reality with the food part is, sure, you can go for a long time without food, but what I can say is that when you don't have food and you have low blood sugar problems, it can become an issue. And the reason is because you're just not thinking clearly. And when you're not thinking clearly, you make bad decisions. Ironically, from the time that we put in till we put out, we only saw one person, a lady that was riding a horse. She said, "Wow, y'all are crazy. Even the locals don't do this." Real comforting when you're trying to manage people's stress, And normally when someone says, "Yeah, you've got about another hour," most people would be excited. I was, because I knew, like, we're almost there. But for some reason, when that came out of her mouth, the couple that we were with, that was just like, oh my God, one more hour? Something that I take for granted. People always say in the field when you go to rescue them, like, I never thought this would happen to me. And I think I take it for granted that I'm just used to seeing these scenarios and situations, and I kind of have come to accept that, hey, this is going to take X amount of time, and you just have to come to a point of acceptance. And if you don't, like, you'll basically go crazy. You will make poor decisions, and God bless them. I felt bad for them. They were all beat up and sunburnt and fiberglass and poison ivy and lost stuff, and it only got worse from there, because when we got out, I thought, okay, great, you know, we made it. Let's just load up the kayaks into the truck, you know, and let's go back to the put-in that was, you know, about 20 minutes away. They were so tired and beat down and just, they didn't care. They left their $1,800 kayaks. Each one was 1,800 bucks. They just left them there with their Yeti cooler and said, screw it. Let's go back. Let's just get, you know, my truck. I'll pick these things up on the way back through. Now myself, there's no way that I'm leaving my gear there. Like I'm just, you couldn't make me do that. But hey, when you're managing a crisis, sometimes you got to give a little. Unfortunately, when we got loaded up and we got back to the put-in site, the guy that took the keys, he was nowhere to be found. And we weren't able to make a phone call either. And there were a bunch of rowdy, drunk kids there camping out, and you know, God only knows what would happen to our stuff. Because what that meant was that we were gonna have to leave and go find a place where we had service, and we had absolutely no idea where we would have service. Turns out it took about 10 miles for us to get to a point where we had enough service where we could make phone calls. Something we had to do is we had to split up, and I know in survival you don't ever do that, but at the time I made the call to make that happen because the girl was freaking out. She was literally ready to take a rock and smash the window of the truck to get her stuff out of the truck. And there was a lot more in play like that, but me and my wife talked, and she decided to go ahead and take her to get her out of there. And then I got with the guy and hey, we'll just decide how we're gonna fix this. Now, because we were out in the country, you know, everything closes. They roll up the red carpet and all that, you know, as soon as dark hits. So we had to go a pretty good ways, you know, where I could get to a gas station. He didn't have a shirt, he didn't have on shoes. You know, I was able to get fuel because I had cash on me. I was able to go into the store, was able to get, you know, food and something to drink. You know, I was like, hey man, you know, call, see if we can find the keys at your house, see if your son can find them. That took like 7 phone calls to make that happen. And to be honest, he was exasperated, and I get it. Now, I've been in that situation many times where you're tired, you're hungry, you're ready to go home, your muscles are giving out, you know, you're just burnt. You know, I just calmly told him like, hey man, whatever it takes, that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna make things happen. Everything's gonna be okay. We don't really have a real emergency, right? We're all good. You know, we've eaten something. I mean, look at what you did. This is like a pro thing, man. You did like 20 miles today. Like, you should be proud of yourself. Like, this is something that you are gonna laugh about later, and what an awesome story you're gonna have after this is done. Now, it took a long time before he got to that point, you know, but, you know, once he had the keys and he knew everything was gonna be all right, and we had gone back to make sure that the kayaks were still there, at that point, that's when he started to be like, okay, yes, I did the thing. We made it. Look at me. Now, there were many other hidden dangers that I'm not gonna bring up in this video because I just don't believe in that. But you need to understand that things, they just don't go as you plan them sometimes. Emergency waits for no man. Now, if y'all wanna see an updated video on my kit and what I have in the kit, then just let me know in the comment section. Hey, if you're honey smack digging the video, like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and until next time, y'all, keep fueling those fires.
If you carry a firearm and discharge your weapon in self-defense, you could face hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees and expenses. So carry the protection of CCW Safe, Self-Defense Legal Services membership. Upfront payment of all criminal and civil defense costs with no out-of-pocket for members.